I see you there, wrapped in silence like a shroud, a quiet watcher at the edge of the world's clamor. There is something in your gaze that speaks of lifetimes of aching, ancient knowledge carved not in words, but in the nervous system, in the subtle contractions of breath and pulse. You do not walk through life. You absorb it. Every word, every wound, every vibration in the room seems to pass through your body like music through a harp string, leaving you trembling in its wake. You have been called sensitive, gifted, intuitive. You have been praised and pitied in equal measure. But I ask you now, not with judgment, but with fierce, compassionate clarity, have you learned to ask what it costs you to feel everything? Before we begin, take a moment to like and subscribe. The more you engage and stay with the content, the more YouTube shares these timeless insights with others. By doing so, you're not only helping this channel grow, but also spreading Carl Jung's transformative wisdom to those seeking meaning and inner truth. Let's dive into the depth of the psyche together. You who feel too much were once children who had to feel everything just to survive. You learned to read tone before language, body before thought. And this attunement, once a shield, became your identity. But sensitivity without structure is not empathy. It is exposure. It is psychic nudity in a world that knows not how to touch gently. You became the cup for other people's venom, the jar for their sorrow, the sacrificial vessel so that others might remain intact. And in doing so, you began to vanish from yourself. There is a deep, often unspoken confusion that arises in the empathic soul, a sense of trespass within their own body. Is this sorrow mine? Is this rage my own? What of this despair that comes in like a tide, unbidden, as though summoned by forces unknown? The truth is, many of those who carry this empathic wound are not merely sensitive, they are fragmented, not broken, no, but scattered through time, through trauma, through the long corridors of ancestral grief. You carry echoes that were never sung in your name. The empath, uninitiated, is like a sponge in a storm, soaking in pain and calling it love. This is not compassion. This is a childhood wound masquerading as virtue. And yet, it is not your fault. It is what you were taught to do, rewarded for doing. You became a tuning fork for the unconscious of others because your own had no room to speak. You felt what your caregivers disowned. You became the emotional regulator of your lineage. But there comes a moment in every true healing journey where the soul must say no more. This is the threshold. This is the initiation. This is the crucible in which the empath becomes not a mirror, but a mystic, not a martyr, but an oracle. For to remain porous without purpose is to remain possessed. And what is it that possesses you? Not demons. No, but unlived archetypes, ancestral burdens, the projections of others' shadows which creep in through the cracks of your unguarded empathy. These specters wear many masks: friend, lover, child, patient, but their core is the same. They seek resolution through you, not with you. The difference is crucial. You must learn the sacred act of containment. Jung once said that the unconscious will seek to express itself, and if not through consciousness, then through fate. Your body, your relationships, your fatigue all may become theaters for this unclaimed drama. You will call it destiny, but it is only repetition. And repetition is the enemy of individuation. To individuate is to become sovereign, to claim your energetic boundaries not as barriers, but as temples. What is sacred is never without walls. Let us speak now of the body. The body, that ancient archive of forgotten truths. The body is where the unconscious becomes flesh. The tremble in the jaw, the clench in the gut, the ache in the chest. These are messages, not maladies. Your nervous system does not lie. It is the oracle of your boundaries. when you absorb what is not yours. It tells you, and if you refuse to listen, it begins to scream. Chronic illness, panic attacks, burnout. These are not failures. They are initiations. You are being called to your own center. To feel deeply is not the goal. To feel wisely is. You must learn discernment. You must ask again and again, is this mine? Not in blame, but in inquiry. Not to judge, but to return. When you hold what is not yours, you deny the one to whom it belongs the chance to face it. That is not service. That is interference. It is time to release the martyr within you. The one who believes love means carrying what was never yours to carry. This is the deeper meaning of boundaries, not rejection, but recognition, not walls, but altars. To say no is to affirm your own presence. To say no is to say yes to your soul. You are not here to vanish. You are not here to merge endlessly into the tides of human sorrow. You are here to become a clear channel, and a clear channel must be shaped, must be hollowed, must be conscious. The unconscious empath is like a river with no banks, flooding everything it touches. But the awakened empath is a river that knows its direction. It nourishes, but it does not drown. You must reclaim your name from the mouths of others. You must call your soul back from the faces you've tried to save. And when the tears come, and they will let them be, not tears of grief alone, but of reunion. You are meeting yourself for the first time, not as a sponge, not as a servant, but as a sovereign being. And what of love? Real love. It does not ask you to disappear. It does not reward your self-erasure. It beckons you to presence. It sees you, not for what you give, but for what you are. When you stand in your own deep, energetic field, when you claim your right to exist without justification, you become magnetic, not because you are empty, but because you are whole. So I leave you with this, not as an ending, but as a beginning. May you stand at the center of your life with your palms turned inward. May you feel, but not fuse. May you touch, but not tether. May you love, but not lose yourself in the loving. Now, if you have journeyed this far with me through the shadows and the shimmering truths, I invite you to speak not in words, but in symbols. Choose a number that whispers to your soul, a number that marks the threshold you now stand upon. Perhaps it is the 6 of harmony and boundaries, perhaps the 9 of endings and spiritual completion, or the 1 of rebirth, the sacred I am returning to form. Let the number be a spell, a cipher, a silent vow. Post it in the comments not as chatter, but as ritual, as reclamation, as the voice of your own archetypal becoming. You are not lost. You are remembering, and that, dear soul, is the most sacred act of all. Empathy without boundaries becomes a trap, and in that trap, your light becomes food for others' shadow. Let me say that again. Your light becomes food for their shadow. This is the danger I must now name with full force in the realm of the unconscious. There are patterns, energies, entities, if you will, that feed on light unguarded. The vampire myth is not a myth. It is a psychological reality. The psychic vampire does not bite your neck. They pierce your aura. They flatter. They confide. They pour out their brokenness, and you, blessed empaths, receive it all, not realizing that each confession, each lament, each sigh is a straw sunk into your life force. You must learn to close the door. Not all who weep deserve your waters. Not all who suffer seek healing. Some seek only to be witnessed in their pain, to be validated in their inertia, to be nourished by your spark, because they have forgotten their own. This is not compassion, this is consumption, and if you allow it to continue, if you persist in believing that your empathy is a moral obligation, a spiritual badge, You will be drained, not just of energy, but of self. And this is the tragedy of the unaware empath: to lose oneself in the name of love, to sacrifice the self upon the altar of compassion, only to discover that the offering was never received, only consumed. What then is the way forward? You must learn to feel without fusing, to witness without absorbing, to hold space without collapsing into it. This requires strength, not brute force, but psychic sovereignty. It is a strength forged in the fires of shadow work, in the patient unearthing of your own wounds, your own darkness, your own denied rage and unmet needs. Only then can you sit with the pain of another and know that it is theirs, not yours. Empathy is not a virtue in and of itself. It is a capacity, a potential, but like all potentials, it must be tempered by consciousness. Otherwise, it becomes a vector for possession. And I use this word deliberately, for when you feel everything without discernment, you are no longer you. You are a vessel for the unintegrated contents of the collective unconscious. You become the sponge, the filter, and filters, my friends, must be cleaned or replaced. Otherwise, they poison what they touch. In the next part of our gathering, I will speak of the deeper mysteries of the empath's journey through the shadow, the necessity of withdrawal, the power of solitude, and the sacred return to the self. For now, let this truth resound in the chambers of your heart. Feeling everything is not a gift. It is an invitation, an initiation, and if you do not accept it consciously, it will devour you unconsciously. And so, we must confront the truth, an unwelcome truth, for the wounded empaths, that to feel everything is not necessarily a mark of divine sensitivity, but often the unresolved bleeding of one's own unconscious made porous. The unconscious, when undifferentiated and unacknowledged, becomes like an open wound in the psyche. It bleeds into every interaction, into every dream, and every glance exchanged on a crowded street. The empath becomes a walking vessel of absorption, but not discernment. I have seen many such souls in my lifetime. Fragile figures cloaked in warmth, yet entangled in invisible threads of sorrow that do not belong to them. And when they come to me, they say, "I feel too much. I cannot turn it off. I think I'm gifted." But I look into their eyes and see not the fire of the oracle, but the exhaustion of the abandoned child, who long ago learned to read the mood of the room in order to survive. This is the original archetype they must face, the child wounded by chaos. It is not clairvoyance. It is hypervigilance. It is not a spiritual antenna. It is a trauma that has grown sophisticated. If you have found yourself always carrying the burdens of others, ask yourself, were you first trained to do so by necessity? Was your nervous system forged in an atmosphere where to feel for others was the only way to avoid being consumed by them? These questions are not accusations. They are invitation doors into the labyrinth of the self. And to enter that labyrinth, you must pass through the gateway of shadow. The empath who refuses to explore their own shadow will always confuse compassion with fusion. They will not know where they end, and another begins. This is a kind of possession, an energetic occupation, where the soul of the empath becomes an unguarded sanctuary for projections, curses, and invisible contracts. When we do not know our own darkness, we become a magnet for those who will unconsciously ask us to carry theirs, and so we attract the narcissist not because we are cursed, but because we are incomplete. Yes, the narcissist, the charismatic enchanter, the wounded tyrant, the fractured god. You see, empaths and narcissists orbit each other with uncanny gravitational pull. It is not a simple dynamic of good and evil, but a deeply symbolic entanglement of archetypes, the martyr and the false king, the mirror and the mask. Both are hiding from their own reflection. One has escaped into feeling everything, the other into feeling nothing. And together they perform the ancient dance of unconscious union. You must understand this. The narcissist does not merely seek supply. They seek sanctuary. They feed on your light, not out of malice alone, but because your light awakens what they have buried. They despise and crave you in equal measure. To be near you is to risk the emergence of their true self, the one they have locked in the dungeon of repression. And so, to keep you close, they must keep you confused. They must distort your mirror. This is the psychological warfare of the archetypal vampire, not the sucking of blood, but the siphoning of psychic clarity. The empath, lacking inner boundaries, becomes the perfect host. They confuse the hunger of the narcissist with the call of the wounded. They believe love can save, that sacrifice can purify. But this is not redemption. This is repetition, repeating the original wound with a new faith. And here lies the tragedy. The empath becomes addicted to being needed, because in their own childhood, love was transactional. Feel for others, and you survive. Ignore yourself, and you are safe. And now, decades later, they wonder why love feels like spiritual erosion. But, my dear listeners, this is not destiny. This is a dream you must wake from. And like all dreams, it holds symbols, riddles, and doors. Do not run from your ability to feel. Transform it, alchemize it, temper it with the fire of awareness. For feeling without awareness is chaos, but feeling with consciousness is prophecy. The work begins not with protecting yourself from others, but with recovering the parts of you that gave them access. Where did you first learn to abandon yourself? What silence did you fill with the sorrows of others? What archetypes have been animating your empathy? Perhaps it is the savior, the belief that if you love deeply enough, you will heal the unhealable, or the oracle, who believes every emotion is a divine signal rather than an ancient echo, or the mirror, who reflects the world but forgets to see their own face. These archetypes are not your enemies. They are way stations in your mythic journey toward individuation. But they are not the destination. You must move beyond them into the sanctum of the true self. This is the task of the modern mystic, not to deny their empathy, but to refine it, to shape it into a chalice that receives only what it chooses, rather than a broken bowl that leaks with every storm. You are not here to feel everything. You are here to feel what is true, and to know what is not yours. The rest is noise, interference, psychic, static, from the collective unconscious. Ah, yes, the collective. It too plays a role in your burden. We live in a time of mass projection, of emotional outsourcing. People no longer face their pain, they transmit it, and the empath, being open, becomes the receiver of these transmissions. Filters. This is why you must create inner filters, not worlds, not defense, but boundaries made of clarity. For without this, you will be devoured by a world that mistakes sensitivity for servitude. I do not say this to frighten you, but to awaken you. You are not meant to be a sponge. You are meant to be a flame. And flames do not absorb. They illuminate. They transmute. They burn away what no longer serves the soul. But to do this, you must be rooted in your own truth, not in the feelings of others. It is time to reclaim your inner sanctum, to call back the fragments you gave away in the name of love, to cleanse your empathy of martyrdom, to see that the gift you were given was not the ability to feel everything, but the call to feel precisely and to know deeply that knowing is your gift, that knowing is your sword, and with that sword, we shall go deeper still. For beneath the empath and the narcissist lies a deeper mystery, a shared origin, a broken temple, and to heal it, we must descend even further into the dreams, the myth, and the secret contracts forged long before this lifetime. But for now, Take this breath, and remember your light is not for feeding, it is for freeing. But the tragedy of the empath is this. They wander into the world with their inner doors wide open, with no filter, no guardian at the gate. They believe they are helping by taking in every emotional current, thinking that the more they feel, the more human they are. They confuse emotional permeability with virtue. They do not yet see that empathy without structure is not love. It is surrender to chaos. It is not a spiritual gift, but a spiritual wound disguised in the vestments of kindness. Do not mistake sensitivity for consciousness. Sensitivity, left unchecked, can become a sponge that absorbs the projections of others. The unconscious is not kind. It does not differentiate between nourishment and poison. It consumes whatever it is fed. And so the empath who refuses to individuate becomes a host. They become a sacrificial vessel for the unconscious material of the collective. That is why so many empaths fall into despair, anxiety, and illness because they are not feeling their own pain, but the orphaned feelings of others who have refused to do their inner work. I once said, "No tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell." This is especially true for the empath. The empath must consciously descend into their own underworld to reclaim the strength that lies dormant beneath the mask of compassion. For feeling everything is not the gift, discerning what is yours and what is not. That is the alchemical gold. You see, many empaths are children who are made to parent their parents. They grew up attuned to the emotional storms of others because their survival depended on it. They were punished for expressing their own needs, so they became skilled in reading others' moods, in anticipating collapse, in preventing eruption. This survival strategy became mistaken for spirituality. But what is unconscious adaptation in childhood becomes a prison in adulthood. The empath must face their inner child not as a victim, but as an orphan who learned to survive in a house of mirrors. They must ask, when I feel others' emotions, am I truly connected, or am I trying to prevent abandonment? Am I offering love, or am I managing threat? Much of what we call empathy is merely hyper-vigilance wearing a halo. Real empathy, the kind that is born of individuation, is not enmeshment. It is not rescuing. It is standing at the threshold of another's pain without crossing the border. It is presence with boundaries, compassion with discernment. But the unconscious empath, the one who has not met their own shadow, cannot do this. They are addicted to emotional fusion. They are drawn to those in pain not because they are strong, but because they are still seeking the love they never received. They are still hoping that if they save the wounded other, they will be saved in return. And so they attract the narcissist. The narcissist is not drawn to the light of the empath because of love. They are drawn to it like a moss to flame because the light is unguarded. The empath offers what the narcissist cannot generate: a reflection of worth, a mirror of soul. But the narcissist does not seek transformation, only consumption. They do not drink from the cup to be nourished, they drink to empty it. And the empath, unaware, mistakes this hunger for intimacy. They say, "He needs me. She's broken. But I can fix her. If I just love them enough, they'll change." These are not the voices of divine compassion. These are the echoes of a wounded inner child still trying to be chosen by a parent who never looked their way. The narcissist does not love the empath. They use the empath to feel alive, and the empath, unconsciously complicit, allows themselves to be devoured, believing that this martyrdom is holy. But I tell you, self-erasure is not sainthood. Let me say it again. Self-erasure is not sainthood. It is trauma reenactment wrapped in spiritual language. Do not confuse being drained with being devoted. Empaths must stop worshipping their ability to feel. They must begin the sacred task of knowing what they feel, why they feel it, and where it comes from. This is the path of individuation, the painful, heroic road of sorting self from other. You are not everyone's healer. You are not the emotional landfill for the world's refuse. You are not here to rescue the drowning at the cost of your own breath. And yet, I understand the longing to be seen, to be loved, without needing to explain, is primal. Empaths do not want power. They want peace. But they must learn peace does not come from absorbing the world. Peace comes from integrating the fragments of the self. So the work is this: to pull back your projections from the narcissist, to stop seeing them as the helpless child, and instead see them as a mirror. What part of you is still addicted to suffering? What part of you believes that love must be earned through sacrifice? What inner voice whispers, "You are only lovable when you are needed"? This is the shadow the empaths must confront. Not the shadow of others, but their own. Let us pause here. Breathe with me. If you find yourself weeping, if you feel exposed, this is good. The psyche is speaking. The unconscious is no longer content to remain silent. Let it rise. Let the image form in your mind's eye of the person you could not save, the lover who fed on your kindness, the friend who took your silence for consent, the parent whose pain became your burden. Bring them to the altar of your awareness, not to curse them, but to see them clearly and then release them. They were never yours to carry. You were never meant to feel everything. You were meant to feel what is yours. And through that intimacy with your own soul, become a light that cannot be hijacked. But what of the empath who wakes each morning with a chest full of unspoken sorrow, who walks through the world like an open wound, feeling not only their own burdens, but the burdens of others, like silent ghosts pressing their weight against the skin of their soul? Such a one must ask, who am I when I feel so many things that do not belong to me, and why? In the sanctuary of my own solitude, do I still carry the echoes of pain I never lived? You see, the danger here is not merely emotional exhaustion. It is the loss of psychic identity. When an individual becomes so permeable that the boundary between self and other dissolves, then what remains of the self but a mirror shattered into the faces of those around it in such a condition? The empath is no longer living their own life, but serving as a vessel for the unconscious projections of others. The neighbor's rage, the mother's grief, the lover's despair. All of it seeps in, disguising itself as one's own. And so, I must say, this is not compassion, though it may masquerade as such. True compassion arises from a grounded self that knows its own substance and chooses to extend understanding. But what many call empathy is merely fusion, unconscious identification with the contents of another's psychic world. It is not union, but entanglement. The difference is subtle, but profound. This fusion is especially dangerous for those who have not individuated, for they do not yet possess the psychic scaffolding to hold such energies without collapse. They have not yet descended into their own depths, faced their own shadow, or met the archetypes that dwell within their personal unconscious. And so they bore the archetypes of others unknowingly. They weep the tears of their father's unlived life. They carry the guilt of their ancestors. They mistake ancestral echoes for personal conviction. And because no one has taught them how to interpret their own symbols, they drown in the dream world of someone else's myth. Here is where the empathic gift becomes the empathic curse. For in feeding everything, they no longer know what is truly theirs to feel. Their joy is confused with borrowed bliss. Their sorrow echoes with the tones of long-forgotten trauma. Not even their own. They become an echo chamber for the collective unconscious, amplifying what has been unacknowledged by society, by their family line, by generations of psychic avoidance. This is why I say that to feel everything is not a gift. It is a dangerous overextension of the psychic boundaries which are meant to protect and define the self. It is the erosion of the psychic immune system. The porous soul, like an unguarded dreamscape, is vulnerable to every wandering spirit, every ancestral pain, every projection hurled from the unconscious of the world. And it is no wonder that so many empaths are chronically fatigued, ill, or despairing. For if the soul is always open and bleeding, if the gates are always unbarred, how can the castle stand the ego, meant to serve as a container and interpreter of psychic content, becomes overwhelmed? The unconscious begins to spill into daily life. Nightmares surface. Physical symptoms arise with no medical origin. Synchronicities grow intense, ever frightening. And in these symptoms we see the cry of the self return to me. Remember who you are. The path forward is not to shut the gift away, but to transform it. The empath must learn to discern, not to reject feeling, but to understand it. Is this mine, or does it belong to another? Does this pain reflect my wound, or am I merely resonating with a pain I have not yet explored? These are the questions that return us to the self. And let us not forget the role of the shadow here. For many empaths, their hypersensitivity is in part a compensation, a way to avoid looking inward. By focusing endlessly on the pain of others, they bypass the confrontation with their own inner darkness. They become healers of others, but exiles from their own wounds. And so the shadow grows. It watches, silent, waiting, knowing that one day it will be heard. When the empath finally turns inward, when they dare to walk into their own forgotten valleys, they begin to distinguish between their soul and the souls that pass through them. They begin to set boundaries, not out of selfishness, but out of sacred preservation. They stop performing emotional labor for those unwilling to face their own psychic content. They refuse to be used as psychic storage units for collective repression. And yes, many will resist this change. The world has grown quite accustomed to feeding on the light of the empath. It will not give up its meal so easily. The narcissist, the manipulator, even the spiritually unconscious friend may cry betrayal. But this is not betrayal. It is rebirth. It is the necessary rupture that precedes psychic sovereignty. The empaths must understand that the light they carry is not for the consumption of all. Not every wounded soul has the right to enter the sanctuary of your essence. There must be gates. There must be discernment. Even the sun does not pour itself into every cave. It chooses when and where to shine, guided by the rhythm of the cosmos. When you begin to honor the sacredness of your own light, something extraordinary happens. You stop attracting those who would devour it, the narcissists, the energy vampires, the users. They sense the shift. You are no longer an open field. You are a temple, and temples are not entered without reverence. There comes a moment in the life of every empath when they must make a choice. Remain a passive receiver of psychic content, or become a conscious alchemist of it. This is the beginning of inner authority. The moment when the empath no longer asks, "Why do I feel so much?" but instead demands of themselves, "What will I do with what I feel?" To transmute feeling into wisdom requires fire. The fire of discipline, the fire of honest reflection, the fire of saying no. Even when your conditioned self longs to say yes, this fire is not aggression, but purification. It is the heat that forges gold from the dross of unconsciousness. And it is this fire that separates the true healer from the wounded martyr. You see, many empaths remain trapped in martyrdom. They believe their suffering is proof of their goodness, that if they suffer deeply, if they bleed emotionally for others, they are somehow worthy of love. But this belief is not divine. It is a trauma contract inherited from a family, a culture, a religion that glorified suffering without transformation. Real suffering is not meant to break you. It is meant to awaken you. So I ask you now, is your empathy leading you toward awakening or deeper entanglement? If your empathy leaves you depleted, bitter, confused, then it is not empathy. It is over-identification. It is psychic codependence. It is a refusal to claim your own soul path because you are too busy navigating the pain maps of others. This is not virtue. This is avoidance dressed in the costume of kindness. True empathy does not absorb. It witnesses. It holds space. It remains rooted in the self while reaching towards the other. And this requires an inner architecture that few are taught to build. For modern culture has no ritual for the emergence of the empathic soul. It offers no initiation for those who feel deeply, and so many wander the world wide open. Never taught how to shield, how to release, how to transcend through feeling rather than be consumed by it. But the archetypes do offer such teachings. If one dares to enter their domain, there is the warrior who teaches the empath to protect what is sacred, to say no without guilt, to stand firm when manipulation whispers seductively, "But I need you." There is the magician who teaches the alchemical art of transforming grief into grace, pain into insight. There is the lover whose sacred energy must be directed not only outward, but inward toward the reclamation of one's own worth. And there is the king or queen, the sovereign archetype who presides over the inner kingdom with clarity, order, and compassion without compromise. When the empath begins to work with these archetypes, something changes. They begin to retrieve the fragments of themselves lost in old emotional bargains. They call back their power from every room where they cried so someone else could feel safe. They burn the scripts that said you must heal them to be loved. And from this ash rises a new kind of being, the individuated empath. This being still feels, but chooses what to feel, when to feel, why to feel. They are no longer an open floodgate. They are a sacred vessel. The water of feeling moves through them, but it no longer erodes them. It nourishes, it reveals, it hurts, it strengthens. And in this strength they become dangerous to the unconscious, because one who feels deeply and knows themselves fully is a threat to every system that relies on unconscious submission. They cannot be manipulated. They cannot be shamed. They do not collapse when others project rage, guilt, or sadness. Instead, they see, they reflect, and they choose their response with sacred deliberation. To reach this place is not easy. It is not comfortable. You will be misunderstood. You will be called cold by those who fed on your warmth. You will be called selfish by those who benefited from your lack of self. You will grieve the friendships, lovers, and family ties that only survived because you played small, but in time the soul rejoices. For you are no longer merely feeling life. You are living it. The true empath is not a sponge, but a seer. Not a victim, but a vessel. Not a servant to emotion, but a sculptor of meaning. And what of love? You ask love, when filtered through an unconscious empath, becomes sacrifice without sacredness. But love, when channeled through an individuated soul, becomes revelation. It does not ask you to dissolve. It invites you to stand, not as a wall, but as a pillar rooted in your own knowing, radiating from your own soul fire. If you wish to continue down this path, you must learn to be alone, not lonely, but alone, in silence, in contemplation, for only there will you hear the voices that are truly yours. Only there will you encounter the depths beneath your borrowed pain, and only there will you find a still, clear voice of yourself calling you back home. And now we arrive at a threshold, the place where the empath, once scattered across the moods and wounds of others, gathers their fragments. The place where your sensitivity no longer weakens you. It arms you with discernment. This is not the sensitivity of the uninitiated. not the brittle antennae of someone overwhelmed by every signal, but the trained sensitivity of the mystic, the artist, the true healer who feels not to suffer, but to see. When you have passed through the spiral of your own shadow, when you have faced the archetypes that haunted your nights, when you have reclaimed the self behind the false selves, you emerge, not just awake, but aware. And in awareness, everything changes. You stop apologizing for your intuition. You stop defending your instincts. You stop asking for permission to feel. And instead, you wield your perception like a torch in a darkened room. You see people not as they appear, but as they are. You read their wounds like ancient manuscripts. You sense the rupture between their words and their truth. And most importantly, you no longer confuse knowing someone with carrying them, because you have learned not every emotion that visits is yours. Not every ache is your responsibility. Not every soul that touches yours is meant to stay. You begin to curate your energy. You set psychic boundaries, not as walls to keep love out, but as gates to protect the sacred. You no longer pour yourself into broken vessels. You no longer sacrifice yourself on the altar of being needed. Instead, you become useful to the divine, not through depletion, but through clarity, not through exhaustion, but through presence. And what of the world? The world does not reward the empath who transforms. It does not clap for the one who chooses self-sovereignty over self-sacrifice. The world, in its unconscious state, prefers your compliance. You are soft. Yes, when you mean no. You are silent when you sense something is wrong. Your willingness to bleed so others can remain comfortable. But the soul applauds, the psyche expands, the dream world shifts. You begin to dream not only of others' pain, but of your own healing. You begin to see the symbols of flight, of emergence, of rebirth. You walk through landscapes in sleep that mirror the liberation you have chosen while awake. This is the new chapter, the place where empathy and individuation meet, where feeling and form unite, where you stop being merely open and become oriented, aligned, anchored, no longer a sponge, now a compass, no longer overwhelmed, now overlit. And with this inner orientation comes a new mission not to save others, but to see them not to be their answer, but to reflect their own mirror back to them. Empaths do not heal by absorbing pain. They heal by transmuting presence. You are that presence. You are the one who can enter the room and hold the truth without collapsing. You are the one who can feel without fusing. You are the one who can remain conscious even when the tides of emotion rise. In doing so, you become something rare, something holy, a soul who feels and knows what to do with it. So I leave you with this. Your gift was never in feeling everything. Your gift is in feeling wisely. Your gift is not empathy alone. It is integrated empathy rooted in self, guided by archetype, protected by awareness and offered as medicine, not martyrdom. The world does not need more empaths who burn out. The world needs initiated empaths who remember that to feel is not to drown, but to navigate. You are not here to be consumed. You are here to see, to transform and to illuminate. So rise not as a sponge, but as a vessel of conscious love.